Hello everybody and happy Thanksgiving. I try to make a themed video once in a while, and this time I was like, okay, it's the fall, harvest season, harvest is the theme, and tax loss harvesting is something very relevant to us right now. So wobble things around, harvest the tax loss on digital asset treasury companies. That is the theme of this video. Of course, it's going to be mostly for US investors, but before I even do, let me just begin by saying this is not tax advice. You got to talk to your tax accountant. This is not tax advice. This is not investment advice. This is not, food coma advice. This is a pretty funny American humor right there. Gobble, tilly, wobble. This is not food coma advice. This is just a Thanksgiving edition video. And I was like, okay, let's talk about harvesting losses and kind of how this works. So, little reminder, the US tax code, right? What does it say? Tax loss can be taken if you sell an asset, right? And do not rebuy it for 30 days. Or I've not bought it in the last 30 days and still hold it somewhere in a different account, right? If you sell it entirely, that's a different thing. But if you still hold it somewhere else, then you just have to adjust your cost basis, and it's called a wash sell. So that's the US tax code in a nutshell. And the key to this story, of course, is that you can't buy the same asset. But you can buy correlated assets, but you can't buy the same. And my conversations with AI on this, and I think a lot of what I've researched online from various tax people who tell you to contact them, but also tell you what they think, but tell you to contact them, is that different CUSIP numbers is really the key, and the CUSIP numbers have to be different. Now, for example, I asked the AI, could you sell IBIT at a loss and buy FBTC? And the AI seems to think that you can do that. In my view, I wouldn't do it. I would wait 30 days. I wouldn't do it. I would wait 30 days, because to me they're very, very much similar. But it's a gray area, right? It's a gray area. Like if you buy an ETF on Bitcoin that has like a 0.2 expense fee, and the other ETF actually has a little lower volume and it has an expense fee of 0.15. Then the question is, if you have an audit, can you justify that it's a completely different asset? Probably would have a harder time. So it's a gray area, and the advice of most AIs, of course, is that it's better to be on the safe side. But if it's a different company, if it's something very different, then this gray area is not applying anymore. So if it's very different, for example, if you are swapping, I don't know, Metaplanet, the quote-unquote strategy of Japan, for strategy, the USA version of the stock, then these companies have entirely different strategies. They're fully different, right? Strategy is an operating company. They do software. They do preferreds. Metaplanet, they're a little different, right? They have a put writing strategy. They earn money on their income. They do a preferred, but totally different. So different marketing, different everything, different management team. It's a much easier time to argue this, right? Isn't this a much easier time to argue this? And so, for example, and that all depends on your situation. When you bought Metaplanet, when you bought strategy. But if, say, you're down 50% on strategy and you're down 50% on Metaplanet, and perhaps you've held strategy for much longer time than Metaplanet, you're still up on your strategy shares, but you're down 50% on your Metaplanet shares, and they've traded. I mean, if you look at, say, between June 8 and, say, October 14 or November 25th, like let's say between June 8 and November 25th, the performance of Metaplanet and strategy has been exactly the same. So it may make sense to sell Metaplanet and buy strategy. And then you don't touch Metaplanet ever again. You don't own Metaplanet for 30 days. You don't touch it ever again for 30 days. You make sure there's no residual shares anywhere else in any of your accounts. You just sell it out entirely. You're gone. Different asset. then the wash sale rule doesn't apply, and you take the loss, and you presumably will participate in the rebound, but with strategy shares and not own Metaplan shares anymore. So this is of course very straightforward. But talking with the AI seems to think that, I mean, these are different assets, right? MSTX, leverage MSTR. I mean, they don't even own the stock. If you follow MSTX, which I don't, by the way, I've advised against it so many times, and I don't give advice on this channel. I've entertained against it so many times. But if you look at MSTX. If you look at MSTX has been, I'll be done with a Thanksgiving joke here, but MSTX has just been slaughtered, and MSTY has been the same. MSTY, I remember there used to be an MSTY army. I was like, if you want income, you should just do it on your own. Just do covered calls on your own. You don't need someone else to do covered calls for you. You can just do it on your own. So, anyways, these have been entirely slaughtered. Thanksgiving theme, right? So many turkeys. Anyways. Okay, give me this one. It's just a joke. So anyways, MSTX. So MSTX loss, right? MSTX loss. Well, let's assume you're sitting on like 85% loss on MSTX or something scary like this. Well, maybe you buy options in MSTR, and your options, if there's a rebound, your options should have a return profile pretty similar to the loss that has happened on MSTX. So you could do MSTX to MSTR. You could also do an income strategy. You could do poor man's covered calls. So you could do MSTY loss, and you could buy some options and sell some calls against these options. Again, if you're interested in kind of these dated strategies, like I'm going to call these dated strategies, because you kind of have to get the timeline right if you want to do options. But the same is true for buying leverage ETF. You have to hold it for just a day. It only works for a day. After that, you drift. Volatility drifts. Own any of these for more than a year, and even if the stock is up, you will barely catch it up, right? Compare TSLL to Tesla to have a good idea of the problem of owning these for any substantial amount of time. So, anyways, that's your options for Bitcoin treasuries, and of course, there's so many options for Bitcoin treasuries for wobbling things around, for moving assets around a little bit and changing your asset, change your investment to get a tax cut. Decide to invest in a different treasury company. That way you get a tax cut. Ethereum, that's the same story. So I see two options, of course, SBET and BMNR. Very, very similar companies. One of them has Tom Lee, another one as a co-founder of Ethereum. The chart it's really the same. I mean, it's really the same chart. Like if I were to calculate correlation on this, I mean, you're probably in the high 80% correlation on this. Just looking at it, it's exactly the same chart. So again, I think this makes sense. If you're sitting on a loss on BMNR, swapping it to SBET would make sense. If you're sitting on a loss with SBET, swapping it to BMNR would make sense. Another option is also, and I don't particularly like Grayscale, it's just an example here, but you could buy an ETF on Ethereum, and I prefer, of course, a staking ETF. I'm not even sure there's one has staking in it, but anyways, so you could also walk like this and swap it like that, and harvest the loss. Keep the exposure to the return, keep the exposure to that idea, but harvest the loss. No financial advice, of course. And let's talk about Solana treasury companies. It's the same story. You have UPEXI, you have DFDV. You can see the correlation here. We are looking at a correlation, in my view, in the 70%, maybe even 80% between UPEXI and DFDV, just looking at it. And of course, you have the 2x ETF highly correlated to another Sol ETF here. So you can move an ETF to another ETF, or a treasury company to an ETF, or an ETF to a treasury company, or a treasury company to a treasury company. These are all different assets. These are all different CUSIP numbers. And these all are correlated. So keeping that correlation is important. So anyways, there's so many stocks on which this can be done, where correlation fell to 1 during this crash, which frankly has lasted way too long. And of course, tax loss harvesting especially matters if you have short-term gains to offset, right? I think we can all agree that if you believe in the company, a 15% tax cut is not a big deal. If you believe in the company, right, if you have a loss on strategy, taking and you've held it for more than a year, or you've held all of your other assets for more than a year, well, you're getting taxed at 15%. Right, or 20% if you're in the highest tax bracket, but 15 to 20% of a tax cut. You can argue, oh, I don't want to swap my ASST, for example, or my MetaPlanet. I fully believe in MetaPlanet. I don't want to swap it for only 50% off. You can argue that, but it's getting tougher to argue if you are in a high tax bracket and if you live in a high tax state. For example, some states tax, options income, short-term income. They tax at 12% in some states. I'm thinking about California. I'm thinking about New York. So imagine you're in the 35% bracket. And imagine you also have a 12% sales tax. Well, you're looking at a 47%. You're looking at a 47% write-off. That's amazing. If you are trying to offset short-term gains, if you're in the 37% bracket, you're looking at a 49% write-off. So this gets more and more obvious the more you pay taxes, and especially the more you have short-term gains. That's more powerful for short-term gains than it is for offsetting long-term gains. But it's if you can still do it and you have the correlation perfect, i.e., both you're down 50%. On both stocks that you like, you're down 50%, then swapping makes sense, even if you're in a 15% scenario of taxes. So anyways, this is not tax advice. This is not turkey eating, gobble till you bobble advice. And this is not investment advice, and this is not financial advice. This is only entertainment. So I'm hoping you were entertained. Please like, please subscribe, follow me on Patreon, follow me on X, and have a very joyful Thanksgiving. Have a wonderful day. Thanks for watching.